I was sitting in my cozy little apartment, the one I had decorated with my own hands, when my phone rang. The caller ID made my heart stop. Mom and Dad. The first time they had called in 9 years, not since they kicked me out at 18. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part, that little girl who still hoped for their love, made me answer. I had no idea this call would change everything. Before we start this story, I would love to know where you are watching from, so please hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already. I really want to know if anyone out there has ever experienced something similar to what I am about to share with you. The memories came flooding back as I held that phone, remembering the worst day of my life 9 years ago. I was 18, fresh out of high school, with a full scholarship to study fashion design. I remember running home that day, so excited to share the news with my parents, Gerald and Linda. Dad worked as a mechanic, his hands always stained with oil, while Mom handled accounting for a small firm downtown. They were strict people, controlling every aspect of my life since I could remember. That evening, I sat them down in our small living room with its worn carpet and faded family photos. When I told them about the scholarship, their faces darkened immediately. Dad slammed his beer bottle down on the coffee table so hard I thought it might shatter. Fashion design. Are you out of your mind, Mia? You are going to study accounting like your mother. That is a real job, not some silly dream, he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. I tried to explain that this was my passion, that I had been drawing and designing clothes since I was 12. Mom just shook her head, her lips pressed into that thin line I knew meant trouble. You do not know what is good for you. We have been planning your future since you were born. You will study accounting, get a stable job, and stop with these ridiculous ideas, she said coldly. The argument escalated quickly. I told them it was my life, my choice. Dad stood up, his face red with anger. You ungrateful child. We have sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay us, by throwing your future away. When I refused to give up the scholarship, Mom delivered the final blow. Then get out of my house. If you cannot respect our wishes, you do not belong here. I will never forget packing my belongings into 2 old suitcases while tears streamed down my face. They watched me leave without saying another word. I had nowhere to go and only $47 to my name. For 3 nights, I slept in my beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, too ashamed to ask anyone for help. Eventually, I found a basement room to rent for $300 a month from an elderly woman named Sarah. She was kind, like the mother I wished I had. I gave up my fashion design dreams and enrolled in business administration instead, knowing it was more practical for someone with no family support. I worked night shifts at that same diner where I had slept in my car, serving coffee and pie to truckers and late-night workers. During the day, I attended classes, surviving on instant noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. Some nights I was so exhausted I would fall asleep over my textbooks. It took years, but slowly I built something for myself. I graduated with honors and landed a job in marketing. I worked my way up, saving every penny until I could afford my own apartment. Sarah had become like a second mother to me, celebrating every achievement and supporting me through the lonely nights when I missed having a real family. Now, 9 years later, I had a successful career, a beautiful 1-bedroom apartment in a nice neighborhood, and friends who genuinely cared about me. I had created the life my parents said I never could. So when my mother's voice came through the phone, sweet and artificial, like the saccharin she used in her coffee, I felt a mix of emotions I was not prepared for. Mia, honey, we need to talk. Your father and I have some news we need to share with you, she said, her tone sickeningly cheerful. My heart started beating faster. Maybe they wanted to apologize. Maybe they had realized their mistake and wanted me back in their lives. I gripped the phone tighter, hoping against hope that this call meant reconciliation. But what came next shattered any illusions I might have had about my parents changing. Sweetheart, we sold the house. We need somewhere to stay for a while, and you owe us that much. Mom continued, her voice taking on that familiar demanding tone I remembered from childhood. I owe you. I could barely get the words out. You kicked me out 9 years ago. How do I owe you anything? There was a pause. Then Dad's gravelly voice came through the speaker. We raised you for 18 years, Mia. We fed you, clothed. You put a roof over your head. It is time to pay that back. My mind was racing. What happened to the house? Why did you sell it? Another pause, longer this time. Finally, Mom spoke up, her voice quieter now. Your father got into some trouble. Gambling debts. We had to sell the house to pay them off, but it was not enough. We need a place to stay until we figure things out. I felt sick to my stomach. Dad had always liked his poker games, but I had no idea it had gotten this bad. Through the phone, I could hear him in the background muttering something about bad luck and rigged games. How much? I asked, though. I was not sure I wanted to know the answer. $80,000, Mom whispered. I nearly dropped the phone. $80,000. They had lost their entire house because of gambling debts. Mom, I cannot just let you move in with me. I have my own life now. I have worked hard for what I have, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you mean you cannot? We are your parents. After everything we did for you, this is how you treat us. Mom's voice was getting shriller now. After everything you did for me, you threw me out with nothing. I built this life by myself without any help from either of you. I shot back, feeling 9 years of hurt and anger bubbling up. Well, we looked you up on Facebook. We know you have a nice apartment in Riverside Heights. It is too big for just one person anyway, she said, as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. No, I said firmly. I am sorry about your situation, but I cannot help you this way. There was silence for a moment. Then Mom laughed. It was not a happy laugh, but a cold, calculating sound that sent chills down my spine. Then we will just show up, she said sweetly. We know your address. The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, my hands shaking. They would not really just show up, would they? But deep down, I knew they would. These were the same people who had thrown their 18-year-old daughter onto the street rather than admit they might be wrong. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about all the times I had needed them over the years. When I turned 21, I spent my birthday alone in my tiny basement room eating a cupcake from the gas station. When I had appendicitis at 24, Sarah was the one who rushed me to the hospital and stayed with me through the surgery. My own parents had not even known I was sick. I thought about my college graduation, where Sarah had been the only person in the audience cheering for me. I thought about the promotion I had gotten last year and how I had wanted to call them to share the good news, but stopped myself because I knew they would not care. Now they wanted back into my life, not because they missed me or loved me, but because they needed something from me. The realization hurt more than I expected it to. The next morning at 8 a.m., my doorbell rang. I looked out the window and felt my stomach drop. There was a small moving truck parked in front of my building, and my parents were standing at my door with 6 boxes and 4 suitcases. I watched through the peephole as Dad pressed the doorbell again, longer this time. Mom was wearing a cheap floral dress that had seen better days, and Dad was in his usual work clothes, now wrinkled and stained. They looked older than I remembered, more worn down by life. I opened the door but kept the chain lock in place. We are here, Dad announced as if I had invited them. Help us move this stuff in. I told you no yesterday. You cannot just show up here, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Oh, come on, Mia. This apartment is huge for just one person anyway, Mom said, pushing past me as I reluctantly opened the door wider. We will not be any trouble. But they were already moving their belongings inside without waiting for permission. I watched in horror as Dad carried in a box marked kitchen stuff and set it down on my counter. Mom was examining my living room like she was evaluating a hotel. Nice place, she said, running her finger along my bookshelf. You have done well for yourself. See, we taught you good values. My neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Rodriguez, poked her head out to see what all the commotion was about. She gave me a concerned look, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. This is temporary, I said loudly, hoping Mrs. Rodriguez would hear and understand that this was not my choice. Of course it is, honey, Mom said, but she was already opening my refrigerator and taking out ingredients like she owned the place. The next 3 days were absolute hell. Dad made himself at home on my couch, leaving behind the smell of cigarettes and beer that no amount of air freshener could mask. He would wake up early and turn on the television at full volume, not caring that I had to work the next day. Mom took over my kitchen, completely cooking meals I did not ask for, and leaving dirty dishes in the sink for me to clean. She criticized everything about my apartment, from the way I had arranged my furniture to the color I had painted the walls. This yellow is too bright, she announced on the second day, wrinkling her nose. It makes the room look cheap. They used my washing machine, constantly hanging their clothes all over my living room to dry. The small space that had been my sanctuary was now cramped and chaotic, filled with their belongings and their complaints. The worst part was when Dad invited his friend Tommy over for poker night on the third evening. 3 middle-aged men crowded around my dining table, smoking and drinking beer, dropping ash on my carpet and talking loudly until 2 in the morning. When I asked them to keep it down, Dad just waved me away. This is important business, Mia. You would not understand, he said dismissively. I ended up sleeping with earplugs and feeling like a prisoner in my own home. During the day at work, I could barely concentrate. My colleagues noticed I looked exhausted, but I was too ashamed to tell them what was happening. That evening, I called Sarah, the woman who had been more of a mother to me than my own mother ever was. Honey, what is wrong? You sound terrible, she said, as soon as she heard my voice. Through tears, I told her everything. Sarah listened patiently, making sympathetic noises at all the right moments. They are taking advantage of your good heart, she said firmly when I finished. You do not owe them anything, especially not after how they treated you. I also called Jessica Martinez, a lawyer I had met through work. She confirmed what I suspected. If they refuse to leave, they are trespassing. You have every right to change your locks and call the police if necessary, she told me. But could I really do that to my own parents? That night I got my answer. I was lying in my bedroom around 11 p.m. trying to fall asleep, despite the sound of the television in the living room, when I heard my parents talking on the phone with someone. Yeah, the apartment is nice. Much better than I expected, Dad was saying. We can definitely stay here long term. My blood went cold. She is weak, just like when she was a kid, Mom chimed in. She will not fight back. She never did. They both laughed, and I heard Mom say something about their foolish daughter, taking care of them like they deserved. In that moment, I realized they had no intention of leaving. They saw me as their meal ticket, their retirement plan. They had not called because they missed me or wanted a relationship. They had called because they needed a place to live, and they figured their pushover daughter would be easy to manipulate. I lay there in the dark, feeling the last of my naive hope crumble away. I had spent 9 years building a life for myself, proving that I was strong and capable. I was not going to let them destroy that. The next morning, I waited until my parents left for the grocery store before I put my plan into action. I called a locksmith and paid extra for emergency service. Within an hour, all my locks were changed. I spent the afternoon carefully packing their belongings into the boxes they had brought with them. I folded their clothes, neatly packed their toiletries properly, and made sure nothing was damaged or lost. Despite everything they had done to me, I could not bring myself to be cruel. I carried all their belongings outside and stacked them neatly by the front door of the building. Then I wrote a simple note and taped it to the top box. You have 2 hours to collect your belongings. Do not contact me again. When they returned from the store an hour later, I watched from my window as they discovered their belongings outside. Dad immediately started pounding on the front door of the building, shouting for me to open it. "Mia, open this door right now. You cannot do this to your own parents." His voice echoed through the hallway. Mom was crying, but they were not real tears. They were the same manipulative tears she had used when I was a child to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. "How can you be so heartless?" she wailed loud enough for the whole building to hear. "We are your family." I walked over to the intercom and pressed the button. "You stopped being my family when you kicked me out 9 years ago," I said calmly. "You made it clear that I was only welcome if I did exactly what you wanted. Well, now I am an adult, and I am making my own choices." "You cannot leave us homeless," Dad shouted. "I am not leaving you homeless," I replied. "I am choosing not to enable your poor decisions. You had a house. You gambled it away. That is not my responsibility." For the next hour, they alternated between anger and fake tears. Dad tried to jimmy the lock with a credit card, while Mom called up to my window begging forgiveness and promising they would change. But I had heard those promises before. When I was 16 and they found my sketchbook full of dress designs, they promised they would support my artistic interests. The next day, they threw the sketchbook in the trash and signed me up for an extra math class instead. My neighbors started coming out to see what the commotion was about. Mr. Thompson from downstairs offered to call the police if I needed him to. Mrs. Rodriguez brought me a cup of tea and told me I was doing the right thing. "Family does not mean you have to accept abuse," she said wisely. "You take care of yourself, mija." Finally, as the sun was setting, my parents realized I was not going to change my mind. They loaded their belongings into the moving truck with angry, jerky movements. Dad slammed each box down harder than necessary, while Mom muttered loudly about ungrateful children. Before getting in the truck, Mom looked up at my window one last time. "You will regret this, Mia. When you are old and alone, do not come crying to us," she shouted. Dad pointed at me through the window and yelled something I could not quite hear, but his expression made his meaning clear. Then they drove away, and for the first time in 4 days, my building was quiet. I spent that evening cleaning my apartment thoroughly, washing every surface they had touched, opening all the windows to air out the smell of cigarettes. I lit my favorite vanilla candle and ordered Thai food from the place down the street. When Sarah came over later with a bottle of wine to celebrate, I finally felt like I could breathe again. "I am proud of you," she said, giving me a long hug. "It takes courage to set boundaries with family." "It does not feel like courage," I admitted. "It feels like being mean." "There is a difference between being mean and protecting yourself," Sarah said firmly. "You have been taking care of yourself since you were 18. You do not owe them anything just because you share DNA." Over the following days, I started to realize how much happier I felt. I could come home from work to my peaceful apartment, cook dinner without criticism, and fall asleep without the sound of loud television or arguing. I began to understand what people meant when they talked about chosen family. Sarah had been more of a parent to me than Gerald and Linda ever were. My friend Marcus from work, who always checked on me when I seemed stressed. My neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, who brought me soup when I was sick. These people had shown me more love and support than my biological parents ever had. 3 months later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my parents had been forced to move in with my mother's sister in another state. Aunt Karen had apparently given them a month to get their finances together or find somewhere else to go. I felt no satisfaction in hearing this news, but I also felt no guilt. I had learned that love should not come with conditions and manipulation. Real family does not abandon you when you refuse to live your life according to their plans. I started volunteering at a local shelter for homeless youth, working with teenagers who had been kicked out by their families for various reasons. Many of their stories reminded me of my own, and I was able to offer them something I had never received: unconditional support and the assurance that their worth was not determined by their family's approval. One evening, as I was helping a 17-year-old girl fill out college applications, She asked me how I had survived being on my own so young. I learned that the family you choose can love you better than the family you were born into, I told her. And I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to say no. She nodded thoughtfully, and I could see the beginning of understanding in her eyes. As I walked home that night, I thought about how different my life might have been if my parents had supported my dreams instead of trying to control them. But I also realized that their rejection had forced me to become strong and independent in ways I might never have discovered otherwise. I am still learning that it is okay to choose my own peace over their convenience. And I am still learning that blood relation does not automatically equal love, respect, or obligation. The people who truly love you will want you to be happy and successful, even if your path looks different from what they envisioned. Sometimes the family you choose loves you better than the family you were born into, and that is perfectly okay. What do you think? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who tried to take advantage of your kindness? Let me know in the comments below what you would have done in my situation. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone. Subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. Thank you for listening, and remember that you deserve to be surrounded by people who truly love and support you. Take care of yourselves out there, and never be afraid to choose your own happiness.